Right, 10:01, we'll call the meeting to order.
All right, we'll start with roll call. Chair Kennedy,
Here.
Vice Chair Goodman,
Here.
Member Fan,
Here.
Member Miller, Member Riordan,
Hello.
Member Suttles,
Here.
and Member Thomas.
Here.
All right. Now we'll move on to approval of the minutes from January 7th.
I asked Amber if we could start doing this as a consent agenda so we didn't have to actually motion, but we do. So sorry, guys. But could I get a motion for minutes?
Motion to accept minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
All right, so we will start going through this. We're going to go through the council study session review and implementation plan discussion. I'm going to do just a bit of an overview. None of it's going to be unfamiliar to any of you, but I'll go over it. We have our consultant, Rick Merritt, here, and he will correct me if I'm wrong on anything or if I misread anything as we go through it. If you have questions, feel free to ask. So housing needs assessment, there's just some facts from it. Our population growth between expected population growth, our expected total housing needs between 2024 and 2040. There's a whole chart in the housing needs assessment, but it's kind of broken down by units needed by period there. And then affordability snapshot. There's information on the cost burden household, median income, and market rent. So all of this is in a lot more detail in the assessment that you all have received. If you need it again, let me know. So the market and pipeline, where the home prices are right now, affordability, in inventory. And then in our pipeline, we have a total of 1875 units. And based on what the expected units needed were, we actually meet, if all of these come to life, we actually meet what we're expected to meet for units through 2030. Now, these are just basic units. It's not specific to to affordability workforce, but there's that. So some highlights from the study session, if you weren't able to watch it. So the workforce attainable housing is the 60 to 120%. That's not new to any of you. And its impact on attracting and retaining essential workers. So some key observations were rising home prices and rents creating affordability challenges. Consultant presentation emphasized new construction, but council stressed balance approach, infill, rehabilitation, home ownership opportunities, land trust models, reuse of existing buildings, and partnerships with employers and nonprofits. So though the discussion was a lot about new build, in the implementation plan, there is many different strategies aside from just new build. The public input was a strong concern for low-income seniors on a fixed income and the competition that may be causing or may cause for limited affordable units. And then some discussion themes from council that for financial incentives, there must be shown a clear public benefit and return of investment, and voluntary incentives versus mandates. Preserving character was big, making sure that anything that's done still keeps the feel of the neighborhoods. And so none of that's super new or exciting. Implementation tools, future land development code amendments will be a big part of that. And then pipeline impact, the current projects that are in the pipeline that are market rent rate shouldn't be affected by any of the implementation strategies. So that was one of the questions, is any of these strategies, are they going to affect what's currently in the pipeline? And it won't. There's some implementation plan key actions, which if Rick is going to come up and talk in a little bit, he can go over some additional things. But there was, I think, 13 strategy or 13 implementation keys and different strategies under each one. And then there was a council strategic planning session the week of January 20th. There wasn't any formal consensus. Workforce housing was in the strategic plan that they created 2 years ago. So it came up as a discussion. these were just topics discussed. There was no consensus. It was not a majority. This is not direction. Just informational that these were discussed. It was a public meeting, all of that, but need for detailed financial data on turnover impact. So HR is working on that. We actually created a survey that we sent to RHR, and we'll hopefully be having him send it out to other ones to talk about their turnover rates and the different costs of training different positions like teachers, nurses, the cost. So all of the things that we've been talking about here, I have that from RHR. I have to get it in a much cleaner format, but we're also working on getting that from partners in the area as well. So we can look at their turnover data and also how much they are aware of how housing is impacting them. So there's even a question on there of how much of your turnover do you assume is based off of housing, or if they have data points on that. So we've asked for that too. So we're gathering more of that. There was interest in exploring affordable and senior housing beyond workforce housing. Again, this is not direction, just topics that came up. Possible focus on city employee programs, down payment assistance, things like that, and then a preference for infill development over new builds. So not a consensus, that was just comments from different council members that came up. So, and then for Rick, sorry, I went through all that really fast, but what Rick is kind of looking for today, and I'll let him speak more to that, is y'all's impact or input for the strategy, initial ideas of the land development code with incentives and density, and input on the financial analysis within the strategy. So I'll let Rick take it over from there. And then for a lot of the other parts, if you have questions, he'll be the main man to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Amber. That was really helpful. Hopefully you had an opportunity to read through the strategy that we put together. We look at the strategy as really a pretty simple format or program. And if you look at what Flagstaff has done, there's basically two concepts to it, or two aspects of it. One is the policy. And you guys have a policy, and it's been adopted. So that's what you need. The other thing is amending the land development code. In Flagstaff, it's a really simple thing. It's maybe 5 pages, outlines what the affordable characteristics are of units there. They have an affordable program, not directly focused on workforce, but it's an affordable program. And they go through what the incentives are, how you qualify for the incentives. Some of it gets pretty complicated. I'd hope that this would be much simpler and more straightforward. You don't have to, up there they deal with resource protection areas, and a lot of things that you don't deal with down here. So I'm hoping that it's a lot simpler program. What I'm really looking forward to hearing from you is whatever input you have on the strategy, the initial ideas for amending the land development code and dealing with incentives and density, and then the input on our financial analysis, which is at the back end of that, and it outlines how we came up with what we think is the construction costs here in the Prescott area, what land costs are, and how that all filters down into rents, required rents, for a workforce housing project. Once again, we're hearing from the council that return on investment is very important, and limiting, if possible, the amount of public funds that may be devoted to workforce housing. And I think there are ways potentially around that. And we're trying to, in our financial analysis, trying to determine if you provide a density bonus of X percent, 10, 15, 20%, whatever it may be, is that enough to make it feasible for a developer to come in and do a workforce program? And that is the big question. To me, we want to make this feasible for a developer. We don't want it to burden the market rate units that are in a project. In other words, we don't want the market rate units to subsidize the workforce units. So I'm trying to focus on what are the the levels of density incentive, which really are basically a no cost to the city, that will make this feasible. And it's probably going to be, from the way I'm looking at things, probably 15% density bonus, 20%, something like that. And that's the top end at Flagstaff, is a 20% density bonus. So we're looking at that and trying to figure out, there are other incentives in your policy. For instance, the waiver of building permit fees, engineering fees, things like that, and that can be a big number for a developer. We forecasted out a 96-unit apartment complex, and the building people are telling me that's $130,000 in permit fees. So is that something the city is willing to provide to a developer to help make the project more feasible? The impact fees are the big thing, and for a 96-unit complex, it's 1.6 million. Well, you can't waive those. The city has to somehow contribute to that amount, whatever amount is subject to the waiver for the developer. So that's a big number for the city. So somewhere in there, we have to show that it makes sense, that it costs $100,000 to train a policeman, and in a couple of years, he gets trained, and then he's off to wherever at a higher pay rate. And so we're trying to figure that out as to what is the return on investment to be able to keep those guys here and not cost the city $100,000 in recruiting and training costs. So I've done a lot of talking. I don't know where you want to start on talking about the strategy, but we're certainly interested in hearing anything you have in terms of where we can go with it. The three things we really see, basically three things we really see as the most important initiatives, are amending the land development code. And that's, once again, putting in the density incentives, perhaps putting in the other incentives that may be waivers and things like that. There's no reason that incentives have to be actually given to a project, but they can be there on the books if you think it's needed, and it will be a cost to the city. And those are the first two things: is amending the code and then developing the incentive programs. And then we look at potentially, since this is a voluntary program, how can you twist arms a little bit to get a developer to participate in the program? And one way we've thought about is water. We met with the water people. They think the process they have right now is pretty expeditious, that things go through pretty quick. But is that a way of perhaps promoting more of a voluntary incentive to get developers into the program? So those are all kind of the highlights that we're looking at this point, and we'd be happy to hear from you on whatever input you may have on that. Oh, okay.
Rick, thank you for all your work on this. I'm curious, when you come up with the estimated range for density bonus, do you have some sample projects that helped you come up to the 15 to 20%?
We did, yeah, we're in the middle of, we did one, just a pro forma type development, looking at a 10% density bonus, and that's in the strategy, or it's at least in the paperwork that you received. And the word that came, I think the analysis that came out of it is that unless you provide a lot of density bonus or you provide a lot of incentives, it's very difficult to make a project work. I'll give you one example. Just if a developer comes in today and builds a market rate project, we estimate based on construction costs, land costs, that it's going to take about $1,850 for a market rent, for the average market rent for the project across studio through 2-3 bedroom units. For a a family making 80% of the area median income, the maximum they can pay is $1,330. So you're $500 different there. So there's a lot to make up there. So that's what we have developed so far. We're working on what happens with a 15% density bonus, what happens with a 20, and obviously 20 really starts to make a difference. But once again, it's that gap, that difference that really is the issue to deal with. And how do you work with that, once again, without making the market rate units subsidize the workforce units?
We proposed a density bonus a while ago to council, and they came back and said they weren't opposed to it, but they wanted more trees and landscape and green space.
Yeah.
And I don't understand, as a developer, how you can have both. And so the thought I think we threw around is that some money paid by the developer goes into a fund that you can develop more open space and parks and things like that. Have you looked at that and talked to council about that or proposed that in any way?
No, I hadn't heard that before, no. I saw it in your policy, and that was a question I had is, frankly, why is that in the strategy when you're trying to devote the effort to workforce housing? But I haven't heard that specifically from the council, no.
Yeah, thank you for repeating those numbers that we've been hearing for 3 years now, and understanding that gap is not going to go away. So there is structures that have to be put in place. I don't expect the city to waive fees or grants to be obtained or philanthropic efforts to move forward without. I think those things are absolutely going to be needed. And I don't expect any of those to come to fruition unless the safe gaps are set up to prevent all that money being in very short order becoming market rate facilities anyway. So there's a lot of work to do. I guess my question is, many of us are getting anxious. So are there things that can be done now? And the one that comes to mind for me is, why can't we set up down payment assistance programs very quickly and implement those very quickly so we can start helping people sooner than later?
Certainly, that's one aspect of the program, particularly for city employees, essential city employees. And there's no reason it couldn't be set up. It is a matter of how you go about funding a program like that. There are IDAs around the state that are doing it right now. Amber mentioned the WISH program, which is, I think, a federal program that provides some down payment assistance. So there are programs around already that you may be able to tie into. But yes, that's the type of thing that could be done virtually immediately if you can figure out how much you want to provide, what the standards are for getting a loan like that, the repayment, if repayment needs to be considered, those types of things. But there are programs out there that you could probably tap into even today.
Have you had any experience with Phoenix's multifamily sea container projects, if they're working or how they worked financially?
Not offhand, no.
One more thing to comment to the board or committee. I mean, it's what comes to mind. We had that gathering at Aspire a couple months ago, and he talked about it with market rate apartments being built at the same time as affordable. How do we keep people that can afford market not competing for the affordable? How do we do that? Because it's cheaper rent, potentially, right? So you got somebody that moves in from, say, another state, and they can afford market rate, but they see this much lower rent apartment and they go for it, how do we help keep the right people renting the affordable?
Well, it's going to take monitoring of the program, obviously. It's going to take staff. You're going to have reporting requirements for these developers. So there's a lot of things that go into it that make sure that the person renting a workforce unit is making under a certain amount, under 100% of AMI. Maybe you want to target 80% of AMI, things like that. So it is going to be, and we've talked about it with staff and in the work that we've done, is that this is a major effort that's going to take staffing over the long term to monitor how these things go. Because you're right, you don't want, and you want to keep that unit. You want, I think in the policy, you say 30 years, you want to definitely have something like that available for 30 years. You don't want it converting the market rate. Some of the tax credit projects that you have around the community are beyond their contracts, and some of them may go to market rate. So you want to have that long-term benefit out there for the community. But it is going to take reporting requirements back to the city to make sure that people that are in there are qualified to be in those units.
So is there an income restriction then in what you're
Yes.
thinking?
Yes. The income restriction, you're defining workforce as 60% AMI up to 120%, I think. So you want to be in that range, and maybe you want to target a lot lower than that to get to, a better workforce requirement. But yeah, you do want to target income, and as the units turn over, you have to make sure that the person moving in is meeting the requirements as well. So.
That goes back to our number one goal originally, have a full-time person. But it is a new council and a new day, so perhaps Councilman Grady can help us have those conversations.
I don't know if there's anything else I can help you with at this point.
Go
ahead.
I had a quick question about, so the units of the 1875 units expected for this need, that's combining apartments and single family, or is there a breakdown of how many of those units are actually like for sale for rent? Because I think part of the intent of this too in this program is to keep people here through ownership. And so if the units are apartment units, I don't know if it has the same impact of building community as putting those into like a single family development or some things like that. But I think, kind of to Randy's point, some of the stuff that's happening in Prescott Valley where the houses are 4 feet apart doesn't create like the best experience in there. So without that, I'm a big advocate of the density bonus and the down payment assistance, but how do those actually, with these numbers that we're looking at, is that applied to that and that total number of units that is coming online?
We looked at both home ownership and rentals, and I do think when you get into workforce housing and the income ranges you're talking about, you want rentals as well, but you want to promote home ownership, and that's the key. So I think there are numbers in our report that talk about that. I mentioned an apartment complex, but if you have a developer coming in to do a subdivision, that's going to be a totally different animal. And I talk about that in the strategy. In Flagstaff, for instance, a land trust is set up to accept lots in the single-family development that will be workforce housing. The housing probably is a little smaller. It doesn't have as much finishes as the regular housing, but it qualifies as workforce housing. And the community land trust takes over the unit then, and it's sold to an affordable or a workforce unit or workforce family, and then it continues on as a workforce housing as people move in and out, sell their home, things like that. There's equity sharing that takes place, things like that. But yes, I think it's a big part of it is getting people into home ownership opportunities. And so we're looking at both options.
Question, and I'm wondering statewide, have you what I'm about to say is kind of off the wall a little bit, but we have to think outside the box. Recently, I looked at some real estate listings of some of our older hotel, motel units here in town they're trying to sell. We built some nice new hotels, so I think the competition is straining them. And I'm wondering if anybody in the States looked at turning those into ownership, whether they're condos or townhomes or whatever you call them. They're small, granted, but somebody could go in there and convert them and then actually sell those units. Is anybody doing that in the state?
Yeah, there are examples of that all around the state of convert. Sometimes it's transitional housing for homeless, for people that experience domestic abuse, things like that. But yes, those types of developments are all around the state, but more in the urban areas, but they are in various places.
And how do they work around the fact that they don't have water meters for every individual unit and that kind of thing? Because that's a city requirement with our water department here. Sewer hookup as well, individual laterals instead of one main lateral.
Well, that would have to be something that have to be looked at, and maybe there's need to be some amendment to the codes, whatever. But a lot of those units are more targeted towards affordable. You know, people making less than 60% of the median income, because they are smaller. Like I said, sometimes they're transitional housing for homeless, things like that. I don't think they're looked at as a long-term solution, but they certainly serve a purpose of getting people off the street, and can serve to some extent for an affordable type unit for some period of time.
We have one in town on Gurley there across from the old Apache that used to be a hotel, and those are all single unit homes now. My daughter actually lived there for about 6 months. So the question around water and sewer, we probably have an example we could research. I don't know what the answer is, but we do have an example of that in town here.
Did she own it or rent it? I'm thinking more like ownership. If there's a way, like we just said, ownership is the key to all this, you know, and pride in your property and all that kind of thing. Even if it's a little tiny place like that, you own it and you take pride in it, take care of it. It doesn't turn into an eyesore. But I don't, in my mind, I can't quite work out how to do that. Parking's going to be an issue. There won't be any covered parking. Could be lack of parking. And then, like I said, with the sewer and the water, you know, the power is usually not a problem, but the sewer and the water could be. And it would take a change in our building codes to do that, I think.
Okay.
What cities are doing that you could say, example?
Well, I've seen them in Phoenix. I believe there's some in Chandler that have converted it. But I did, as a matter of fact, now that you remind me of that, Mr. Suttles, yes, right up the street, there is an old hotel that has been converted into apartment units. And I forgot about that, yeah.
You know, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Moab, but Moab, Utah is really impacted by housing, and it's really difficult. But what they've done is put up, 500 square feet to 1,000 square foot studios and 2 bedrooms and things like that. And they've limited it to where only primary residences can purchase these things. So I think it can be done, and people will buy them because space is space, and this is a great destination, and people come here to hike. If they come here for lifestyle more than anything. So if we build it, I think we can fill it for sure. If you look at Moab, I mean, they're going for $300,000 for 900 square feet. It's still affordable, $300,000. So it's, everybody, the $450,000 price range right now is the new $250,000 price range of old. Right, everybody wants in on that. So if something can be built for three and a quarter thousand square feet, I think people, and there's no covered parking. They have little storage units off-site that they can utilize, but it seems to work.
Rick, I was in a separate meeting this week about housing, and I think it was one of your colleagues that was talking about the influx of growth. Do you have that data offhand? It was something like 90% of people still coming here over the age of 65?
I haven't seen a breakdown by age, by growth, not offhand, no. But I will tell you that, I'm trying to find some. I will tell you that about 25% of your people that are burdened by housing are 65 years and older. A lot of people don't focus on that, but it is a substantial amount of the households in the city that are burdened are 65 years and older. One thing you mentioned about Moab and the housing that's there, if you go out to, this is Davidson Homes out in South Ranch. I visited them a couple weeks ago. And you can buy a house there for, till it's all over and done with, it's probably going to be $400,000, but it's 1,126 square feet is the smallest unit, one-car garage. So there are some developers out there, they're in 35-foot wide lots, small lots, but that's the trend of where things are going. If you look at construction costs that occurred between 2020 and today, and how much different it is to the CPI. Construction costs went way up, 35% costing. You guys probably know this stuff. It hasn't come down. The CPI has leveled off to some extent, but the construction costs have remained. They haven't come back down. And that's what everybody's fighting right now, is construction costs are still up there. And the only way to attack construction costs is higher density. And that's why you're seeing 35-foot wide lots. In Phoenix, there's a developer talking about not even putting in garages. Now, are these going to be slums in the future? I don't know at this point. But there are people that are trying to address the issue. And Davidson Homes out there has somewhat addressed it, getting a house for, roughly around $400,000, 1,200 square feet. Get somebody in the house, but that's probably what you're facing when you're looking at home ownership again for workforce housing.
Yeah, $400,000 here gets you a 600 square foot, no garage, single lot this is a part of the other challenge is that once you find one that's in the price range, you're going to have to spend another 150 to 200 to bring it up to a more modern standard, because the bedrooms are 10 by 10 or they're smaller dimensions, things that don't work with a lot of way people live today, a lot of the work from home and environments that we're working in. It's also part of the reason I like the 30-year ownership. I think with a different tangent. I'm not a huge advocate of that, because I think that stifles development, stifles like the continued development of it. And then also a 30-year-old floor plan is a 30-year-old floor plan. So when we have like a 10-year cycle on it, I think that kind of keeps things fresher and gives us architects more things to do as well.
I think the key to all this, though, is ownership, and I've said that all along. I'll give you an example. In 2006, I was looking at doing a 90-unit housing project in Hemet, California. And in 2008, when the crash hit, Hemet took it hard, and that was because it was 49% investor-owned real estate in that town. 49%, almost half. And so the investors walked away. And I'm certainly glad I didn't build those 90 houses, but we would really want to avoid that here. In other words, if we provided this affordable housing unit, who gets to buy it is critical.
Yeah.
And I mean, deed restriction, I don't know, but that has to go into this. It has to, or
Yes.
investors are going to buy them, and that'll be that.
Yes. Yeah, you need the restrictions. You need various tools like that to make sure that it continues on for 30, 50 years, whatever you put in the program.
SB 330. So a couple of years ago, California released SB 330, which allowed people to subdivide their lots, and that spurred huge development. That was pretty much all we were doing for a couple of years over there. It was just because now you could subdivide it and put two units plus two ADUs. And so you get 4 doors on your property on each lot. The units are small, but is that something when we consider density bonus, is that something that's on the table of subdividing lots?
Not specifically from a density bonus standard, but there are requirements now from the state. I believe the city's working on an ADU. You already have an ADU provision in your code, and I think it needs to be updated to match the state requirements. But I believe if you have a 1 acre lot, you can put 2 ADUs on it under what the state is proposing right now. So that is an alternative, as long as they don't turn into short-term rentals. That is an alternative, and the state has come down with the rules on that.
Rick, I think what I'm looking from you to us is, if you use an example of a 90-unit complex a minute ago, I want to know if that at a 90-unit complex at market, and then we go workforce housing, how many more units does it take to make it work financially for the developer? How much more density, not percentage, actual number of units? Is it 20 units? Is it 10? I want to know that number. If you could work that out, I really would appreciate it.
Yeah, I have those numbers. We could maybe do it offline. I'd love to hear from you guys who are in the development business as to what you think in terms of land costs, construction costs, things like that. I'd be happy to meet with you, on the side and show you what we have. We've done a 15% density bonus and a 20% density bonus. So,
Well, the reason I say that is in some discussions with council members, they want it, percentages are great, but they want to hear real
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
Five more apartments or 10 or 20, whatever it is. That's what I'd really like to know to make it balanced for the developer, because we all know the costs are too high.
yeah. I can review those if you like anytime, so.
I have, for a new employee coming into fire, police, teacher, whatever, you're probably not going to want to buy a house right away. You're going to want to wait it out for a year, at least until you pass probation. So that's one thing that's always, not as a developer, but as an end user. I retired from the fire department like Randy did. That, and in the last couple of years, we've had a lot of doors that have been built. And when I say doors, I'm talking about like Havenly Project and other apartments. They're out there. They're there now. Why have we not addressed giving some incentives to existing complexes? Like I said, there's just been a lot of them been built in the Prescott Valley area in the last 2 to 3 years. A lot of doors out there. What is, if anything, we can do to the existing owners to encourage them to provide for workforce housing?
That's a great question. And the only place I've really seen it done maybe is in the ski country in Colorado, places like that. But it takes a lot of funds to do that. There's a program in Vail where they go out and they buy basically a deed restriction for an existing unit. And that deed restriction then will make sure that a person living in there works in the Vail area, and there's some kind of income limit. But they have a $2 million fund, I think, to take care of those types of acquisitions. And every year they put $2 million into this thing. And they buy, deed restrictions for 10 units or something like that. I forget the exact numbers. So there are programs out there to do that, but they're very financially costly for the city.
Quick question. I noticed I think the number was over 2,900 rentals in the Prescott area, roughly. Is that about accurate?
That sounds pretty close to traditional rentals, yeah.
Okay. And I assume the equity would be in those homes probably 70% or more. probably fair statement.
Probably, if they're there for a while, yeah.
Okay. Are you familiar with Homesteading Act at all in Texas and Florida?
Not offhand, no.
Okay. In those areas, primary residences are required to file as a Homestead Act, so they have reduced property taxes. Anything that's other than that receives a higher property tax rate. And this can be common in other counties that do raise those up a little bit, but I was looking at just 2,900, and we don't have to go full gamut, to Homestead, but what if you raised $1,000 per home that's an investment property? That's 2.9 million. If you double that, that's over 5 million. That certainly could be put to better use. Why I bring up the equity position is because the home probably cash flows pretty well. And at $80 a month for $1,000 a year really isn't a big ask for an investor. So perhaps we could just utilize that to help the builders build better, cheaper, subsidize some of these other things. Make sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure what what you would need to do from a regulatory standard to do something like that. I believe that in the property tax requirements, you're required to show if you're a rental unit or not, and perhaps there is a way of taxing those units differently than a normal homeowner at this point. So
Is that a strategy to consider?
we could take a look at it for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm not a big fan of more taxes, but, kind of look at the white elephant real quick.
I have one more question for you, Rick. Have you seen any communities that have some really successful, robust YIMBY programs that you could call out?
What kind of program?
YIMBY, like Yes in My Backyard.
Oh. Well, a lot of the suburban communities have concerns, but in the city of Phoenix, probably they've been the most successful in overcoming that. They've used a variety of different tools. They've used the GIPLETs, if you're familiar with the GIPLET, government property lease excise tax. They've used that extensively, particularly to build apartments, multifamily apartments with at least 20% moderate income, low, workforce income. So they've been very successful in that aspect of it. And I don't hear as much in the NIMBY thing as much from Phoenix as we hear in other places. So that's a successful program. They made they set out a goal of producing 50,000 affordable units 5 years ago. They've already reached that. And they have 70 GIPLET programs around the city. So they're using that very effectively. If you want the GIPLET, you have to provide 20% affordable units in your community. So it's been very successful. That's the main one I think I've seen that hasn't been impacted as much by Not in My Backyard. So
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being available to us afterward, too.
sure, thanks a lot.
All right, so now we'll go to the goals discussion. So things to keep in mind, reviewing current status, strategic priorities, consider new goal ideas, and then concept goals. So for mostly our new members who weren't here for a lot of the workforce housing policy framework, I thought this would be kind of a good example. As a committee, your role is to recommend policy to council, set the vision and priorities, Council reviews and approves or adjusts policy direction. So they either say, yay, we love that, or we want to adjust that a little bit. And then staff implements the programs and projects based on council approved policy and direction. So example, you created the workforce housing policy framework, council approved the framework in November, and now staff will use that framework to develop programs like down payment assistance. So that is something that as staff, we are working at looking at the different down payment assistance. Mike's not here, so I won't speak for him, but there's some growth on that end potentially from CDBG. So staff is working on that, and we'll bring you updates on that. So that's kind of how we work. I tried to put these, sorry, it's text heavy, but completed short-term goals. We did receive some funding for the $200,000 through the State Housing Trust Fund. We did host a stakeholder organization group for Objective 1, General Plan Housing Element Draft. So these are all the ones that we've completed. Attached to the agenda that you all received, there's the Excel version of all of this. So I tried to just make it a little bit prettier for this. So completed long-term goal is through the housing needs assessment. We've been able to identify the number of units needed. So units by 2040, 3,355 with 136 to 265 units added every 5 years. And then in progress short-term goals, the stakeholder organization group is Objective 2, gauging interests, selecting an organization type, and then creating the 2 organizational packets. We are in progress with that with the consultant. And then research financial program solutions like down payment assistance. We're working on that actively right now. ADU code revision. I know there was state things with that. And then community outreach. We've created the standardized messaging and some of the tasks complete, town hall and all of that. In progress long-term, create a regional workforce housing strategic plan. So we're very fortunate that our consultant is actually the consultant for quite a few other areas in the region. So hopefully once all of the different regions look at their different housing needs assessments and plans and land development codes, we'll have a really, really good look at a regional view of workforce housing. And then not started yet is wait a second. Hold on one second. So, okay. So the educational packets, Pollock and Company, they have done the outreach part. And then the next step will be creating the actual packets. And then one is for the developers, one is for the workforce. And then community outreach, engaging local groups, clubs, things like that. I know we do have one coming up in April, I think. So, and then facilitate partner to create a tangible product. So we did receive some feedback from a couple of committee members on proposed new goals to look at. And so funding and program exploration, such as the WISH program, I had actually not heard of that before a committee member sent that. It is a program that is utilized by a couple banks in the state to offer down payment assistance. And from what I read, they also have a tie to time at the work or at the place of employment. So they have to be there for 5 years, or I think even one of them said 10 years. Exploring Industrial Development Authority bonds and consider construction sales tax rebates, research incentives for owners of existing rentals to offer discounted workforce housing, policy regulatory clarify HOA restrictions on ADUs and multifamily occupancy, align priorities with Pollock and Company's next steps. So if I remember right, let me look at my presentation here. The next steps, I used what we've talked about as a committee, or what you all have talked about as a committee, what we've received as feedback from council, as well as the proposed new goals. And I came up with some concept goals. I am not tied to any of them. They're just ideas. We can scrap them, but just some ideas to get the brain juice flowing, technical terms. So reviewing previous goals, new goals, council input. I tried to create 4 short-term, 4 long-term. Each goal includes the intent, the different roles, so it's assigned who actually does what in what part, and very loose estimated cost and staff time. So you can kind of see what they could take if you all wanted to pursue them and if council wanted to further pursue them. So one of them was in financial tools. So build a policy framework for sustainable workforce housing funding. So the committee's role could be prioritize funding tools like WISH, IDA bonds, tax rebates. Again, you all would build that policy framework and then it would go to council to see what their thoughts are and if they agree. And then define the policy guardrails, eligibility for essential workers. And if you wanted to work on wordsmithing that. Staff role would be provide initial assessment, policy options for council consideration. And then this one could be depending on how much staff time and which options, like if committee liked this goal and they wanted to continue and they're like, if you all said, look at these 50 options, it's going to take a little bit more time than if you said, just look at WISH and IDA bonds. So could cost-ish between 10 and 20, just depending on what you were looking for and what programs you wanted to prioritize. So do you want me to go through all of them and then you guys can kind of be like, we like pieces of this and we can build them from there?
Should we just do the 1 to 3 as a group and then the 3 to 5 as a group?
Yeah, we can do that. All right. So this one, infill development, encourage workforce housing through infill development on underutilized land. So committee's role, say that that's actually the direction you wanted to go in as a priority, and then provide input on policy principles, proximity to jobs, infrastructure efficiency, and then staff role would be to identify potential infill opportunities and report progress, integrate into housing strategy. So that one has a more minimal cost, but a medium staff time. And then communication and awareness, build a public understanding, developer engagement. Committee's role would be shape messaging. Thankfully, you all have kind of already done that. But then act as ambassadors, partnering probably with council because they're the main face of a lot of this. So if the committee were to go like to the farmers market with council and do joint communication and awareness, and then we would help with providing materials for that. And then the last one for short term, define city's role and explore third-party partnership. I know that the committee's talked about, so I'm gonna sound like a frog now. This committee has talked about a third-party partnership. We've talked a lot about the importance of that partnership, but looking at it, what is the city's actual role going to be in that partnership? Is generally the city is not going to create that third party. That third party entity is someone the city is going to end up partnering with. So what role would the committee suggest the city play in that? So recommend policy framework for partnership, what functions the third party should perform, funding coordination, project facilitation, advocacy, provide input on criteria for selecting a third-party organization. So if we were to do, like under the staff area, would we issue an RFP if there's more than one out there that's interested? Would we formalize a partnership with an existing nonprofit or regional entity? So just clarifying the city's role in that third-party partnership. We've seen with Flagstaff doesn't own and they didn't create the Northern Housing Solutions, but they partnered with them. So what's the city's role and what role does the committee hope the city will take in those partnerships? And then we can actually start seeking out those partnerships. So those are the short-term suggested not suggested, concept ones, just to get your guys' thought process flowing and go from there.
regarding goals, and a little off subject, and I want to be really sensitive as to how I say this, but we're a workforce housing committee, so we're focused on workforce people. I see a lot of stuff about seniors and their housing. Is that something that we're going to become the voice of, or is there another committee in town that's doing that, or?
So I'll have to double check. The only place that senior should have popped up in the presentation was when council had their strategic planning. And that was just a discussion, not a consensus. It wasn't a majority. It was just a topic that came up. And we did have a decent amount of seniors who came to the study session. So that's why it was mentioned, is that it is a topic. At this point, we haven't gotten any direction past what we've already gotten from council that this is a workforce housing committee. But it was something that it did come up enough by the public at the study session, and it was mentioned at the strategic planning session, that I just wanted you all to be aware that it is something being discussed in the community. But as far as we've been given direction at this point, this committee is still workforce, that 80 or 60 to 120.
As a committee, are we willing to shoulder that responsibility too, or did we just want to stay focused on workforce?
I hate to interrupt that, because that won't actually be the committee's decision. That would be direction from council. So at this point, the committee can only focus on what they've been given the direction at this point, which is just workforce. So until or unless council as a majority gives direction to the committee to change direction, the committee doesn't get to change direction. No, you're good. I just want to check. But
I think in my mind, it kind of goes back to a lot of us are like anxious to really have a big win this year. Like we really need, I think we laid a lot of groundwork last year. The policy framework is great. I personally really agree with codifying something that will make a measurable difference. And I'd love to open that up. Is there something beyond density bonus that we think is really important? And maybe this requires a stakeholder conversation. I'm not sure, but what do you guys think?
Well, right off the bat, I think, and especially if Michael is already working on, and staff is working on some things with regarding down payment assistance, I think that's some low-hanging fruit that can be implemented quickly. But we're just not implementing it. There's not. I hear staff's working on it, but I'd like to hear where are we and when can action be taken.
so that's a great question. So I know CDBG is in the process of looking at that, and I hope Mike has an update for you guys at the next committee meeting. At this point with down payment assistance, it's kind of with our HR to build out a program and then implement it. So that's something that we're looking at, the different options. There's actually a lot of options out there. So it's just finding the right one that works for our employees, as well as if, depending on which one we go with, there could be a financial obligation on the city's end, which then would be up to council. But if we were just to partner with a bank or something like that, there may not be that financial obligation. So we're looking at those different aspects. And then if it seems like the best one for the city is one where the city has to put in money, then we have to go through the budget process for that. So that's going to take more time. So a lot of the things that are in the implementation plan and are in the framework are things that we'll bring you all updates on, but the committee won't actually be building them. That'll be staff that has to build them, has to go through the budget process to implement them, to ask for budget, to implement them, to ask for staff resources. So there are things that we are working on right now that we'll bring updates on as we have them, but there are things that are going to take time if they need more staff resources or budgetary items.
And I'm sorry that this might be a question that's already been answered, but I don't know what the answer is. We've heard, I mean, the bottom line is the city of Prescott as an employer is a significant stakeholder. And we've heard from our police chief that we keep training and losing people. We've heard from our fire chief the same. I'm sure we would hear the same from Public Works. Has a financial analysis been performed on what that cost is, what it's already costing us? So our mayor and council can look at this and say, we already have this expense. What we want to do is shift that expense from losing employees to providing workforce housing to these employees so we don't lose them.
Yes, so that is something, and I can kind of go over what we included in the survey to our HR, that this document and the information in it will be used when budgetary requests are made. If we go with a down payment assistance that needs a budgeted amount, we can say this is how much we're losing. So we received the overall turnover rate, which is 14% for 2025. Our average annual turnover rate is 15.3%. The number of employees who left due to housing costs in 2025 were 5. Estimated percent of turnover attributed to housing costs is 7%. Number of job offers declined due to housing costs in 2025 were 35. And then we asked for cost to recruit for certain areas, recruit time, cost to train time, and savings over 5 years if they stay. So we do have that information. It's not in a nice format right now, but we are working on getting that into that nice format, but we can actually provide that information to council to give that backing. I just did some very, very, very loose numbers. And if we were to lose 2 police officers per year, it'd be about $163,200 per officer. Annual cost would be about $300,000. 5-year total, if we lost 2 per year, could be $1.6 million. So loose numbers, very loose, but we are gathering that specific data so that if we need to go for budgetary requests, we have that information to provide.
Amber, I think that's a really great start. And I'm wondering, now we have a new economic development person at the city, right, Tricia? Would that be something that would be perhaps in her job description to help us add to that? Because I think there's more factors at play here with proposed projects, the increase to property tax revenue, the sales tax revenue for those that are infill that, result in spending in the community, reduced infrastructure if we are, again, leaning on infill as much as we can. I just think there's a lot more factors, and probably way more than that somebody with an economic development mindset could help us really calculate some strong ROI numbers for council.
Yeah, I can send it over to her and have her work it over, or ask her to work it over.
Thank you. That's awesome.
When we met in November with council, they asked us to give them exactly what Mike just described. You and I talked about it. The percentages are great, but I really want to get down to dollars and cents. What does a public works guy cost us? We've already talked about police. We kind of know that, and fire, but all across the city. Because what did he tell us? We have 42 vacancies in the city. What is that costing us to recruit, hire, and then lose? Because when we get down to the numbers, Mike, then we can say, okay, look, it's costing us this much for this employee. What are we willing to do in down payment assistance or workforce housing? In my mind, it's like 50%. If we could save 50% of what we're losing by providing that service, I think that's a home run. And that's the number I've been trying to get to. And I've been hearing it's coming, but I want to get to that number. I'm anxious to get to that number.
Yeah, so that's generally what this is all going to end up as. We have the turnover, we have the cost for hiring, we have the cost for training, the train time, how much it costs per day that space is vacant, because there's a cost for that too. If we don't have an officer in a spot, how much is that costing? For a utility worker, some very loose numbers, average cost of separation if they left for housing would be about $60,000. If we lost 2 utility workers a year, we're losing around $120,000. So we do have those. It's just getting them into a more visually appealing format, but we do have those and can provide those to council now as data for when we're asking for budget or asking for staff. We do have that. Or when a project comes forward for workforce housing for a police officer, we can say, this is how much we're losing per year based off of our turnover, based off their training. So we do have those numbers now.
Well, if you need a volunteer to format it, I'm volunteering myself because I was asked to do that. You know that. And I really feel that I've been negligent on not providing that. And here we are, February, and I was asked for that in November, and I promised I'd get it done.
So the good news is the ask was more for the information which comes from staff. So we do have it, we're formatting it, and then we have it for the supportive documentation. So we appreciate your willingness to format it though, but it's actually not in that ugly of a format. It's just clearly stating, okay, we have all this data. What does it actually mean? Telling the story with it. So it's just writing that story.
Can that be kind of wrapped up in goal, like if goal one is understood as financials and tooling, kind of how we're doing this and like how these programs, could that be like an objective? I actually really like the way the goals are laid out, and that we have, financial tooling, how we're doing this, where we're doing this, and then goals 3 and 4 to me is like, who we're trying to bring in to implement this work. And so like seeing, like, I think all those are important. Like the foundational one is how much is this going to cost? How we're going to get this done? And that seems like a good goal 1 that I'm aligned with, because I think it also ties into doing our due diligence on these WISH programs and other financial tools that can be used to bring that in. And then the infill portion of it, where we're doing it, I think is low-hanging fruit to identify why we're working on goal 1. And once those 2 are done and we have our communication package, we can move on to 3 and 4. And courting developers to come in and do developments or bring, if we need to bring in people from outside, but also just getting, there's a really, every time I talk to somebody in the public about workforce housing, it's really, we don't want low-income housing. It's like, no. So it's just getting that message out. I'm glad you said farmers market. I think that'd be a great place to sit and just talk and chat with people once we have something to chat about.
I'd like to comment on that. I think to convince council and ultimately the public that we need to do these things financially, this will be our strongest tool. When we have this information, what you just asked for, Mike, I think that's going to be our strongest tool to convince those that this can work. Even though it's going to cost some money, it'll save us money in the long run. And that's our strongest tool, guys. A lot of the stuff that we recommend are nice things, and we all know we need it. But this is actually a tool that we can use if we can get that information put together.
And keep in mind, that's just one stakeholder. I mean, yeah, it's a major employer. The City of Prescott is only one of several major employers that are experiencing the same costs, the same issues, the same challenges.
Yeah, they're losing people.
And I have asked our HR director if he would send it to his fellow HR directors in the area too, and see if we can get. So far, we haven't gotten any additional ones, but I'm hoping that we'll at least hear from maybe Dignity or PUSD and be able to have those numbers for the specific target areas that council's been focused on with healthcare, teachers, fire, police.
That might be a good segue. Just looking at goal 7 about the employer partnership, that might be a good segue to the long-term goals.
All right. So, and again, I'm not attached to any of these. So if there's parts you don't like, if you want to switch them out, I'm very content with all of that. Regional workforce housing collaboration, formalize Prescott's role in regional housing solutions, and define how the city participates. So there's been a lot of different regional aspects happening later between workforce discussions and the changing of the workforce, as well as housing solutions. And so there's a lot of different conversations happening. So what is the city's role, and how is the city going to participate? And this is for the committee, you would recommend a direction for the regional engagement, level of involvement, priorities, and provide input in preferred collaboration model. And then it would really come to council to determine how much of a role they want the city, because they would more than likely be the face of those interactions and engagements. They would be our representative at those collaborations. So then it'll be up to council on, do they want to convene and lead a regional housing task force? Do they want to participate as a member in a regional housing authority or coalition? Do they want to provide financial land contributions to regional projects? Or do they just want to advocate and support initiatives without direct financial or operational? So that'll be more of a council determination, but the committee could provide guidance on what you would recommend for the city, knowing what you know about the city, knowing the different aspects and things that are happening. Then the next one is workforce housing incentive evaluation and refinement. We have a framework in place working on the implementation. So that will need continual review to see what's working, what's not working. When we have a project that gets to go through the framework, how it worked, what didn't work, so that having this as a continual goal of evaluating and refining what's working for our area and what's not working for our area, having staff collect that data and present it in an annual workforce housing impact report. So just keeping up on that maintenance of that framework and adjusting it as we find out what's working and what's not working, or as new concepts and new best practices come into play statewide or countrywide. And then employer partnership policy, develop a policy framework for employer participation in the workforce housing solutions to support essential workers and strengthen local economic stability. So identifying priority sectors for partnership, healthcare, education, so some pretty clear ones that we already have a good sense of. Recommend principles for employee contribution. Are there ways that they can volunteer or equitable, transparent? Provide input or incentive concepts for employers, recognition programs, tax benefits, expedited permitting. Some of those we're already doing or working on. So staff role would be researching best practices for employer-assisted housing programs in similar communities, things like that. So some of that we've done parts of, but it could be built out more for the framework. And then, so that's all I have for those thoughts on those. And then there doesn't need to be any, actually, I think I phrased it to where there can't be any decision made to approve all of these, but taking these, thinking them over, reworking them.
Quick thought. Sorry, Kevin. I saw your hand. I think all of these are accurate. We continue to focus on fee waiver, developer concessions, employer-funded solutions, and I think those are proper. I don't think we're giving proper attention to exploring nonprofit funding options, whether it be for workforce housing or, maybe, some of the senior low-income housing, maybe that can be, better facilitated through a nonprofit solution and not necessarily be as, in conflict with the same housing that we're looking at. So we're talking about the same things in different ways, and I'm not hearing us talk about new things. So I just want to plug, and I don't have the answer, but I want to keep that idea alive. How do we get people who will freely donate their money in order to assist us versus big government taxing them where they are going to hate it, in my opinion.
And that might align in a couple different areas, like the third party partnership. That's been one of the aspects of the Northern Solutions or Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. I always flip their name around, but they are one area that people can donate, and it doesn't have as much of we have a lot of gift clause aspects to what we do as a municipality. So having that third party partnership can maybe address that to where funding can go through there easier. But it's also determining, do we want to work with Habitat? Do we want to work with, who do we want to work with and how? And does the funding go through them? Does the funding come through us? If it comes through the city, then how does the city? So, and Rick can correct me on this one, but a lot of the really successful ones we've seen have a third party organization and partnership involved to address some of that.
Align that. I don't have a follow-up on that one. Mine was earlier in the packet. One of the more immediate goals seemed to be the land use code, or talking about the land regulations, which I didn't see in any of the goals.
So that one will be more through community development rather than, because they're doing, and Chelsea might be able to speak more to this one, but they're going to look at the whole land development code. And do you want to speak to that? Because that's more of a, okay, if Alex wants to speak to that, that's a much bigger project than what this committee will.
So we would just be doing our workforce housing bit that's a contribution to. Oh,
Yeah, so Alex Bramlett, I'm the planning manager. So it's part of the strategic implementation plan is to incorporate land development code changes that address the workforce housing. Specifically, what does that look like? We're not sure yet. That's what we're hoping Rick will help us with. So that's kind of one of the elements that is being looked at for the implementation. At the same time, we are looking to update our land development code as a more holistic overhaul. So we would probably wrap that into that whole overhaul, which is going to happen completion within the next year or two. Does that answer your question?
Alex, is there any way to prioritize some of the low-hanging fruit pieces that would really make an impact rather than waiting 1 or 2 years for the whole thing to be done?
Yeah, that's certainly something that would come from a council level. And I know there's been other low-level projects or code changes that they've wanted to see. So if we get direction to do kind of a small update with this maybe being one of them and a couple other things, that would be something we could do, excuse me, in the interim before we get the whole overall completed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's up to you if you want to take until the next meeting to kind of think these over, send ideas, suggestions. We can bring back some more formalized options with input if everyone wants to take a little bit of time to think things over, look at the original goals, look at some of these concepts, maybe create hybrid ones and send them my way, and I can kind of formulate them into something a bit more what the committee's looking for.
Yeah, I personally want a little time to digest, and then I'll send you. Is everybody in agreement with that?
So just for agenda setting, if it's a little bit more time, if I could have any feedback back by the 13th, so that's Friday, it's a weird day to pick, but by Friday the 13th or sooner, if you don't feel that lucky that day, you can send it over to me, and then that'll give me time to compile everything. All right, and then we can real quick, there is going to be a change on how we do this portion going forward. We received some input, all boards, commissions, and committee staff liaisons received input that having just staff updates and future agenda items has left it a bit open to discuss things that aren't technically agendized, and legal's not loving that. So we're going to adjust this so it's more specific in the future. But one update that I do have, is it the 24th, Rick? That we're bringing the implementation plan back?
March 10th.
March 10th. Okay, I'm behind a couple council meetings. So March 10th is when we're hoping to bring the implementation strategy back to council. So we have quite a few meetings with them next week to gain their insight and input on it, and then that'll be a pretty big discussion. So if you'd mark your calendars for March 10th, we'd love to have you there. I'll plan on doing the same thing though, where I try to send a recap afterwards. That should be a voting item. So I don't know if it, yep, so it's gonna go on voting. We're hoping after the feedback received, we can provide them something that they are happy with and we can get it voted on. So that starts at 3 p.m. in this room. And that's all I have. And I hope Mike will have more of an update on things he's working on in his CDBG realm at the next meeting as well.
Amber, am I permitted to share about an upcoming event that's public?
Sure.
Okay. If you guys are on the signature series text list, okay. So you all know about, we've got an upcoming discussion about the missing middle housing, and they asked me to participate as a panelist. So I just wanted to encourage you guys to share with other folks so we can keep the conversation going.
What day and time is that so I can make sure there's a quorum posted?
Yeah, it's Tuesday, February 17th at the Raleigh P. Simmons Center on Rosser. And it's doors open at 3, and then the panel starts at 3:30. Yeah, the Adult Center. Well, if there's nothing else, then I guess we can adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.